everybody, and thank you for joining us today on a conversation of our nation's future in energy and sustainability. My name is David Bonifacek. I'm the CEO of WB Engineering and Consultants. For those of you who are new to us, we are a national engineering and technical advisory firm. Our primary markets are critical facilities, life science, and energy and sustainability. And that is our goal today, to talk about energy and sustainability and what's next, especially in the context of the recently passed 2021 infrastructure bill. After our critical facilities webinar in June, Jimmy, our presenter, had a lot of direct questions about what's next for sustainability. So that's why we put this program together today. And you'll hear, as you hear, there's a lot of money. It's in the media, it's in the press, in the bill for energy and sustainability, from electric vehicle charging to batteries to even nuclear. I'd like to introduce Jimmy, who's in our Austin office, Texas. Jimmy is our speaker today. He is a managing director of critical facilities, and Jimmy's currently engaged in a number of projects, but especially he's engaged with the electric vehicle charging networks program for multiple clients. And I think Jimmy is one of our best technical commentators, especially on legislation like the infrastructure bill. And he's here today to share his thoughts on the impacts of the infrastructure bill and how it affects our industry specifically. So if we encourage you to put questions in our Q&A, I will be monitoring them and we'll answer them as we go along. And toward the end of the presentation, we'll also be unmuting everyone so that you can ask questions directly to Jimmy. So with that, I'll pass it on to Jimmy. Thank you.
Thanks, Dave. And thanks to everyone for taking some time out this morning to spend an hour with us to go through what we think is a very important topic for the future of our industry and our planet and everything in general. What we wanted to talk about today, really what starts this conversation, is something we talked a little bit about in my last seminar, which is increasing power requirements in on our grid. And our grid in particular has been an aging grid. We've probably all heard this in the news, issues with our grid and how these new power demands are going to affect the grid. This is just a quick recap of what we talked about in our last seminar. Data centers are going to increase probably tenfold the power requirements between now and 2030. And this is not a small amount of power. It's a large number. In fact, data centers consume more power than some countries today, and that's going to become even more as we increase smart devices in our homes and even cars. Everything's going to need a data center. So by 2030, that power requirement is really going to hit our grid hard. The next thing that's really impacting our grid hard is EV charging. This also is going to see a tenfold increase in the next 10 years. You know, we've got tons of legislation from our government telling us about, from our state governments and our federal government, about electric vehicles. California is kind of leading the way. You know, by 2035, they require all cars sold in California to be electric. Virginia, through quirk and a law they passed, has to follow what California does, and then New York and Massachusetts is also following along. So this is going to be something we see, and the federal government has addressed that quite heavily in the infrastructure bill that we'll talk about as well. And one of the last things is climate change. I didn't do a slide for that, but climate change with the fires we're seeing in California and the like is a big problem. And where you saw that impact was not only the fires, but the temperatures in California, where they've been pushing people towards electric vehicles this past week. With the temperatures where they are, they've actually asked people not to charge their vehicles because the grid's overloaded. So those are the things they're trying to address. How do we stop that from happening? How can we become all electric, but not impact service to the client, to the customer? One thing we added in this seminar that we didn't discuss previously was our grid. The electric grid is old. There's over 200,000 miles of high voltage feeders across the country, and it's interlaced everywhere. So obviously, when there's a natural disaster, it's a problem. We can impact that grid in a significant way. You've probably all heard, I know everybody's heard about hacking and the cyber vulnerabilities. We're not going to really talk about that much. Everybody knows, we hear this every day. And we hear about natural disasters every day. Some of the things that we don't hear about is the physical impact to our grid and the physical vulnerabilities. This slide here I put up is just how our utility grids are divided. We have a east and a west, and then Texas is like an island. But the east and the west grids, they do interconnect to have some backup. Texas is truly an island, but if there's a failure in one grid, it can affect the other grid. And where Texas saw in March of 2021 or 2021, when they had 2020, excuse me, when they had the ice storm, and it caused havoc, wreaked havoc, and it took them down. It took down the grid, and they don't have the interconnection between the other grids to help. So where the other grids can help each other, sometimes the Texas grid is vulnerable to that. So the infrastructure bill is what we're going to talk about today a little bit as well, or is the main topic. Does addressed a lot of these concerns. So, excuse me, going the wrong way. The infrastructure bill, in quick overview, passed in November 2021. Its actual title is the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, Public Law 11758. I added a link on here if you want to download it. It's a tough read. It's 1,000 pages, but it's got a ton of information in it. We're going to concentrate on the things that affect our industry. We're not going to talk about the pork in the bill that that all bills that are passed have. That's a different conversation, but we're only wanting to concentrate on the things that really we feel impact our industry today. So the first thing we'll want to look at is EV charging. We were just talking about how it's an impact on the grid. The government's going to invest $7.5 billion to create basically a charging network across corridors that may not have that today. A lot of the major highways today have charging stations, but we're going to have to get this to the mass public. And so if you're going to sell cars to everyone, you're going to have charging stations for them to fuel their vehicles.
And Jimmy, if you just hold off for a second.
Sure.
Here, I noticed that you highlighted the electric vehicle charging infrastructure, but there's also hydrogen.
Yes.
So maybe just touch on that a little bit.
Yes. So hydrogen is also a developing technology for power generation, and there are looking at vehicles. We already have. This also talks about propane and natural gas, which we already have vehicles that run on these technologies as well. So this bill will not only give EV charging stations, they're going to create stations for these kind of vehicles as well. So again, as we come up with technologies to eliminate, the fossil fuels, especially gasoline and diesel fuel, there's got to be a way to when you replace that, you've got to have a way to fuel your vehicles. So that's what this part of the infrastructure bill is really concentrating on. And it's going to bring it to, like I said, the areas that are off the beaten path, that doesn't necessarily have any of this stuff today. The next thing, again, as we build all of this capacity gets added to the infrastructure, we're going to have to figure out ways to add to that infrastructure. They're going to spend $73 billion to upgrade our power generation, and basically this is not to upgrade. We're not going to build any more coal fire plants. It's to upgrade sustainable designs. So large solar networks, nuclear power is another one that you're going to see and you'll hear a lot about in the upcoming years. But and battery technology that goes along with the solar power is crucial. So we'll talk about batteries in a second, how that technology has changed over years and where we see that going in the future, and how we're going to be able to get to that level.
And Jimmy, micro reactors, and the difference between micro reactors and small modular reactors. What's the difference?
I think there's not a much difference. It's just the scale. Micro, I think, is just probably another way of wording small modular reactors, and it's slight differences in the technology. It gets really complicated on the technology side when you read this stuff, but basically they've we just passed I guess the Nuclear Regulatory Commission just approved the use of a small modular reactor, which is only the 7th nuclear reactor type that's approved in our country ever, that's interesting, but it's the first ever small reactor. So that's the future, and the infrastructure bill addresses that directly. That's the way they're going to go. I think the day of the large scale nuclear plant, that's just not going to happen. They're going to go with these smaller scale nuclear reactors, which to me makes a lot of sense as well. And then resiliency of the grid. This is where batteries have a big play. So what to do when we have an event? We're trying to eliminate the potential of events, but when they do happen, what do we do to make that less impactful to the customer? And that's what we're looking at, is large scale batteries and utility scale batteries. So that technology is very in its infancy. It's still got a lot to go, in my opinion, before we're going to get to where we can start talking about replacing fossil fuels with batteries or solar power, because the battery technology, while it's gaining leaps and bounds every day, we're still a few years away, I think, from seeing any huge scale utility batteries, but it's coming. One of the things that was interesting to me when I was going through this is we hear about the cyber, we hear about the natural disasters, but in April 2013, there was a physical attack on a substation in San Jose. It did not make national news I don't really remember this. I mean, maybe some of you do, but it was a coordinated attack where some gunmen actually shot up 17 high voltage transformers in San Jose, and it took down this substation. Luckily, PG&E was able to switch to another one and kept the whole Silicon Valley was going to go down in that event.
So Jimmy, just for a moment, we mentioned the infrastructure. What is a smart grid? I mean, it's not mentioned here, but what is that? How it helps?
Yeah, I mean, smart grid is the ability for when this kind of thing happens, right? Like when we lose something, another part of it can transfer, and we can make that failure, I guess, to mitigate that failure so that it doesn't impact multiple customers. But there's a lot of issues with our grid today that we don't have that, right? Like I read somewhere that in the report that was done by the US government, that there's 2,100 of these super high voltage transformers across the country. And if we lose, there's 30 of those, it could cause a coast to coast blackout. So that's a big concern. And how do they mitigate that? How do they come up with a grid that is smart enough to go around that? That's kind of a smart grid of what we're working towards.
Is that what's in the infrastructure plan? So
the infrastructure is more about, it's dealing with cybersecurity and it's dealing with physical security more than the smart grid technology, I think. It's more about, let's get everything in place to where somebody can't hack our systems, where we can't have guys driving up and shooting up our transformers. If most of you have driven by a substation, you'll notice it's typically just a big chain link fence around it. Now they've gone to solid concrete walls to where people don't have line of sight of these transformers. So that's a lot of what's in the infrastructure bill. And then, just enhancing what we have in place today.
Right. And what was really fascinating, the picture, the screenshot of the grids between East, West, and you and I are in Texas. Of course, Texas is separate. But is there any type of language there that forces it all to be together?
I haven't seen that, but again, there's a lot of language in there. I'm continuing to read this thing daily. I'm assuming that will be addressed at some point, but I don't recall seeing that in their day today. I just know they're just talking about enhancing the physical protection and cyber protection of the grid. But that's an interesting question.
Okay.
So now that we've gotten through this bill, where do we see this thing being implemented? What's going to happen to go from this bill to actually implementing things? So this is kind of something that when we sent this seminar out, or this webinar out, we mentioned these two guys in particular. Anytime you get names like this involved in a solution, obviously a big deal. So our government is going to invest $1.2 trillion in infrastructure upgrades. So that automatically gets some of our smartest entrepreneurs involved. We all know Elon Musk was the founder of Tesla. He's huge on the battery side. And then Bill Gates, who has so many things he invests in, but he is a big proponent of the small modular reactors. And in fact, I'm sorry, Dave, go ahead.
No, go. Just go.
No, and I was just going to note, though, that Bill Gates, even though he does promote nuclear power and he sees that as a future, he also is a big investor in a battery company that we'll talk about on the battery side. So I think both of these guys understand that neither one of these, battery or nuclear by itself, is a solution. I think everybody understands that we're going to have some combination of all of these technologies to get to where we need to get.
Is solar, and then, is there any big investors behind the solar push?
Well, Elon pushes solar. That he thinks that's the future, right? So he thinks we can build large scale solar facilities in conjunction with his batteries. Obviously he wants to sell his batteries just like anybody would want to. And so that, I think he's one of the biggest proponents of solar, but there's several out there. Lots of people think that that's the way, a lot of the environmental groups especially. But personally, I just don't think we can get there with just solar. Some people think we can. I don't think we can get there with just the one solution. Again, I think it has to be a holistic view of all of these things married together somehow.
And is there a connection between nuclear power and the amount of farmland that Bill Gates is buying?
That's a good question too. He's buying up a lot of farmland across the country, and he's doing that for a reason. He's not going to be farming. So I think that's probably in his long-term play somehow, whether he sells it for solar and battery or whether he sells it for nuclear sites. I could definitely see that being part of his strategy. I mean, the guy's smart. Both of these guys are smart. When you see people at this level investing in the technology, I mean, there's a reason they're doing it. Everybody's out to help the environment. I think that's for sure, but it helps their bottom line too. That's just a win-win.
Gotcha.
So we wanted to concentrate a little bit on batteries because this is a question I get asked a lot. Where do batteries play? Batteries, to me, it's a proven technology, right? We use it every day. Data centers, especially, we see it every day. Phones, our laptops. I dare say a lot of people on this call today are probably using a device right now that's running on a battery. So, we understand batteries, they're proven, but can they get us to where we need to get us off the grid? That's where we're headed. How do we get there? So I just wanted to look at the kind of the evolution of batteries a little bit. Some of the early technologies that most of us are used to, especially the lead acid batteries, that's typically what we see in a lot of the data centers, either whether it's wet cell or it's dry and closed batteries. Some of the newer technologies, nickel hydrogen, which we don't see a lot of, but lithium ion we see everywhere, right? That's the electric vehicles. That's a lot of the devices we use are all lithium batteries. There's a lot of positives for lithium but also a lot of negatives. Sorry, Dave, did you have a question?
No, I'm just looking at your slide here. So Jimmy, the Tesla is a lithium.
Yes.
Which one? Tesla.
Tesla's lithium ion.
Right. So if you go into Home Depot and you buy one of those rechargeable weed whackers, it's lithium ion batteries.
Yep. A lot of those, yeah, now.
Where would you see the nickel hydrogens?
I think, it was a technology that you see that they, like in maybe aerospace, I think is where I saw that. I don't see it a lot. It was just something that they're playing with today. I know that it's used in certain applications. It's definitely not in cars. I think where I've saw it is like in the space industry and stuff like that.
So and our cars, I remember lead acid batteries.
Yeah, that was like to start your car, your cranking battery basically.
Right, you put water in the battery, and the nickel cadmium.
Yeah, so that was something we saw in data centers, probably around the 90s, and was a technology they were looking to replace that. I don't know that it ever really took off, but you still see it. I see some nickel cadmium batteries around, but not nearly as much as we saw, valve regulated lead acid batteries.
And where do we see lithium air? Because
So these are future technologies, Dave. So the lithium air, the lithium sulfur, the nanotechnology stuff, solid state and liquid metal are some of the new things we hear. Lithium air is something that that they think can be used in the automotive and aerospace industries going forward. Basically, when you look at a battery, they look at how many watt hours they can get per kilogram of a battery. So
right.
like today, you can get about 350 watt hours out of a lithium ion per kilogram. These lithium airs, they think can increase that to theoretically 3,500, about 10 times as much. But realistically, when it comes out, they're thinking it's around 1,000, which is still 2.5, 3 times more than our lithium ion. Don't think that we'll see this in cars because there's some issues with when these batteries operate. Right now they have a short lifespan, and they create some issues with the way they breathe, and they need like pure oxygen. Well, that's not going to work in a car because lithium and pure oxygen is a bad combination because of the fire issue. So lithium sulfur, which is another one they're looking at, is similar, except they use sulfur as instead of using cobalt, which is terrible for the environment, and it only comes from like the Democratic Republic of Congo or something is the only place you get cobalt, and trying to get it there is so many human rights problems and so many environmental issues with getting this cobalt. People are trying to figure out how not to use cobalt. So even in lithium ion today, Tesla has increased the way they do I guess they use a high nickel for I think it's their anode or their cathode, and they're trying to eliminate the use of cobalt. And I think they have, or they're on the verge of just not using cobalt anymore, which is very important. That'll help this lithium ion issue because we want to get away from cobalt. Cobalt has a lot of nasty side effects.
Gotcha.
So, and then nanotechnology nano means it's like just above microscopic scale. So where this is fascinating, I think, is that this carbon technology they have, carbon and graphite is a very good conductor of electricity. So there's some companies working on these super small scale batteries. So that's a very infant stage as well. There are a couple of companies that are getting close. There's one in Australia, a university there, a company there that's working on this nanotechnology. So I think we'll hear more about this. We're definitely going to get nanotechnology as part of any batteries that have silicon in them. Silicon is something that we try to use to replace some of the more volatile components like cobalt and things like that. So, but it breaks down easy, and there's a lot of issues with silicon. So I know Tesla uses it in some of their batteries, but trying to find the right combination of silicon and carbon and all of that is what's driving our battery research, and it's the tough thing they're trying to figure out.
So in the infrastructure bill, there's a lot of money for research on the batteries.
Yeah.
Is that what a lot of research money?
Especially on the utility scale. Some of the stuff we're talking about here is for cars, and that won't. I guess technically it would be in there a little bit. They talk more about charging, but there is so many committees when you read through there that they want to. There's grants. They're going to fund grants for studies, and I'm sure that somewhere in there, people are going to be able to use that money for this kind of thing,
right?
Which I think is important. And somebody asked us on when they signed up for the seminar about battery types, and one of the ones that they mentioned was solid state. Solid state's it's a very interesting technology too. Basically, instead of having a liquid between your battery conductors, it's a solid material. And what that does is it helps to eliminate the issues with shorts and fires and that happen in lithium batteries. When lithium batteries, they operate, they have material that grows inside of them that can eventually that can cause a short between the anode and cathode and cause a fire. That's what you see, causes thermal runaway, we call it, in the battery side. So how do we avoid that? The solid state batteries is a way to do that. And the solid state batteries can take very high voltage and high capacity components and combine them with the metals and then reduce the fire risk. The only problem with solid state that we have today is anodes, when they're creating electricity, anodes and cathodes, they swell and shrink and swell. Well, with a solid material, how do you do that? So that's what they're struggling with solid state. But I do think we're going to see this in cars, I think in particular, because of the reduced fire issues. And I just think that, and the reduced weight, that's another big thing about the solid state. They're going to weigh a lot less than the regular ones, because that's another negative on lithium ion today, is they're super heavy. So, and anytime there's an accident in a vehicle with a lithium ion, the chance of fire is pretty great. And you've seen that probably on some of the news you've seen with Teslas and accidents, and they've caught on fire. So solid states would eliminate that.
Jimmy, we just have a question.
Sure.
I'm going to quote, are there any house battery storage systems besides Tesla for solar power? Yes.
Yes, there are. I mean, you could search them. I don't have names off the top of my head, but there definitely
we can follow up with that.
Yeah, we can follow up with that. There definitely are. And I'm trying to think, actually, I reached out to one for my house and it was not Tesla, it was somebody else. But yeah, we can certainly follow up with that.
Yeah, and Jimmy, the incentive from the federal government and the infrastructure bill, this is like more of a residential question. I think what's 30% now on the capital?
Yeah, it's something like that. And it's different probably from state to state, because you get state incentives as well.
Right, but it's something, it's quite a bit. So for everybody, I think
it's substantial.
It's substantial. So
I know for we're working on, you mentioned that we do a lot of EV charging. We've done 7,000 sites or something across the country. And one of our newer clients that we're working on in California, we're doing solar canopies so that we can drive not the chargers themselves, but all the ancillary loads for trailers and guard shacks and lighting off of the solar panels. So the cost of those, is like $450,000 for the contractor to build this, but with incentives, it ends up costing the client like $50,000. I mean, it's a really huge incentive on not only on residential, but even commercial. I mean, I was surprised how much they're getting back on incentives and tax credits and such. So even in California, who's leading the way, they've started cutting back some things, but there's still a lot of money to be given out. So it's definitely worth pursuing. And so not only helps your bottom line, but helps the environment. It's just a great thing. The last battery technology I wanted to talk about, which is kind of exciting to me, is it's called liquid metal. There's a new company, and it's Ambria, and they are backed financially. Their biggest investor is Bill Gates. So what I was saying earlier about he invests in nuclear facilities, but he's also an investor in batteries. The liquid metals technology is very new. It's definitely in its infancy as well, but it has so many positives that we're excited about. I know instead of using lithium, it uses calcium and antimony, and basically these are inert metals, so they're not flammable. There's no chance of any kind of fire or thermal runaway. And actually, when they're at room temperature, they're solids. And the way these batteries work is once they're delivered on site, they are internally will heat themselves to 500 degrees centigrade. I mean, it's a crazy number that melts the metal. And then they use that for they're conducting electricity. But the interesting thing is it's all contained in the battery. You don't have to provide power for that does it itself internally. And since it runs at such a high temperature, you can put it in any environment. You can put it in the desert. You can put it in the Arctic. It doesn't matter. So I want to see this happen. This is fairly new. We actually work for this client, and it's an exciting technology. And it's something that I see if there ever is a large scale potential for utilities, this is one of the ones I could see being a play for that and for large solar facilities. Today it's about, Forbes did an article, I think it was Forbes, that it's about it's less than a third the cost to buy calcium and antimony than it is to get lithium and nickel and manganese and cobalt. So the cost to construct these things is going to be a third to a half less. And they're saying lithium ion batteries will probably be down to $100 per kilowatt hour or below by the mid to late 2020s. And this liquid metal thing will actually be significantly less than that. And the other thing that's interesting about this battery is it can do cycle after cycle and it doesn't degrade like the lithium does. Lithium degrades after the more times you hit it. These batteries actually like to be discharged completely every day or two. And it's really nice to see somebody going outside the box. And I think this has a lot of potential. And since you don't have to heat it and cool it, and you can set it anywhere, it saves you money on the ancillary electrical costs. So that technology is something that we're going to keep our eye on. I can't say that it's a solution today, but it is a potentially exciting solution. I think the next thing we wanted to talk about was fire protection. And we talked a little bit about how lithium, it is very volatile when it burns, when it's mixed with water. So what do you do in a fire protection situation? And we've been running into this a lot with our code consulting guys, and Andy Shanahan is one of our leaders in code consulting. And this is something he sees a lot of questions on, is how do we deal with these batteries and what kind of fire protection can we put on them? And really, we're seeing it, and you can't, like I said, you can't dump water on these things. So what do they do? And then it was very interesting. We had a discussion about this yesterday about a fire protection system, and I think they came up with like argon and another gas that could be used in lieu of water, but they're not UL listed, so that causes problems with some of the jurisdictions. So there's a lot. Long story short, there's a lot of conversations and education that has to happen with our local jurisdictions and our local fire departments and our local, fire marshals. And that's something that we feel like we're very well suited to help with. So in the event you ever have any of these kind of questions, or you have code consulting that you need, we could certainly help with that. We've got a broad experience in this, and Andy Shanahan is one of the best.
Great. So take it seriously when the airlines say, are there any lithium batteries in your suitcase? There's a reason. Yeah, and if you see some of the videos of the way these batteries fail, I mean, it's pretty dramatic. And you can't put it out. What do they do? So that's the struggle. Right. So the last thing that I wanted to touch on, we talked about a little bit, is the nuclear reactors. There's one coming online in Wyoming. I think that's going to be one of the smaller scale. It's the company that was approved. The design that was approved was a company called NuScale. So we expect to see that soon, and there's going to be more people jump on this bandwagon. Really, we wanted to just throw this in there because it is an emerging technology. It is in the infrastructure bill. We're going to see a lot of study on this in the future. This is still a few years away, but it's closer than it was before August when it got approved by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. So I'm excited to see it personally, because it is going to help with greenhouse gases. It will reduce a lot of the concerns that we have with fossil fuels today. Now, it does have its inherent risks, as we know, but again, this will be studied intensely in the future. So I think as this goes along, we may do a more in-depth seminar on this in the future. So in summary, I really just wanted to say, we talked about the vehicle charging. That's a huge thing coming. I think we all know it. WB is well suited if you have any need for that, whether it's chargers at your facility or you're building an actual charging facility in standalone. We're well suited in our background to do that. Upgrading the power infrastructure, I think we all know that has to happen. How do we get involved with that will be the question of the day. And then resilient infrastructure, how are we going to protect all this infrastructure when it's in place? So that kind of wraps up what I wanted to go through. We did have a couple of questions, Dave, that was submitted along with the registration. So I was just going to touch on those real quick. Yeah, sure. The first one was,
how to move towards rapid decarbonization fast using available and proven technologies. So that's funny. Everybody wants to do that. I think the big place today is batteries. Where can we use batteries, like in front of generators? Because we eventually want to get rid of the generators. I don't think we have the battery today to do that, but we could use batteries in front of generators, like in a data center, to handle the short outages, and then go to generators if it's a long one. But that would help because most of the outages are very short. And then I think just being more invested, and pushing this with your clients. If you've got a client, cost is always going to be an issue, I think, but being an advocate for it is how we can make this happen faster.
Yeah. We've opened up the mics, Jimmy. So if anybody has a question, you can ask.
Thank you for a very informative overview. This is helpful.
Great. Glad you liked it.
Also, if you could, up on the upper right screen there, there's a QR code for any comments or what do you call a survey. That'd be great if you could kindly fill out. We'd like to, every time we do these, we like to improve them and make them better. It was great, Jimmy, and just the more questions and the more interaction there is, the better.
Is there any technology out there for creating batteries from nuclear waste?
That's interesting. I haven't heard that, but I mean, I know, we see them use the depleted uranium for lots of things, but I've never heard it used for batteries. That's interesting. I'll see what I can find on that. But obviously we've seen it in medicine, and we've seen nuclear in medicine. We've seen nuclear for. It was funny back in my day when they used to have it in exit signs. We don't see that anymore, but there were little depleted nuclear batteries inside of exit signs. So no, it's possible.
The other question, sorry, go ahead.
Is there any movement toward retrofitting existing large data centers with the batteries that currently are supplied by backup generators and things of that nature?
Hey, Norm.
Hi, Jim.
Yeah, I do see it. I go to the 7x24 conferences a lot, and we see this discussion. There's several data center companies that are leading the way in this, where they do see batteries being a huge player. I think they're all still skittish about getting rid of their generators completely, because it's such a beast, and it's such a proven technology. So it's going to take a while. It's going to take somebody to take that leap of faith. And I think I've seen a few companies getting close. And if you go to some of these seminars, you'll see it. It's just still a little scary for these guys, because they got a lot of money on the line, and having batteries to ensure that they'll back up their facility is still a little bit scary. And I could see that.
Well, the reason I ask is so many of the data centers are in, mega data centers where you don't have a lot of property left around them.
Yep.
As an example.
That's
energy storage.
That's the problem. That's one of the big problems with batteries, other than the safety issues, is space. They take up a lot more space. Now it's getting better. We see people getting smaller and smaller footprints, but still it's typically a lot more than a generator.
Right. Okay. Thanks, Jim.
Sure.
What is the typical accepted fire protection for lithium ion batteries? You mentioned argon. Is there another?
Yeah, it's a good question. I can follow up with Andy on that. And I don't know if you know more, Dave, on that, but it's some sort of gaseous thing that you use, or foam. I think foam is also, there's some foams out there that you'll see, because I think that's what the fire departments use. But in a facility, we did argon in the last one, because I think we were trying to stay away from some of that, because foam's messy, and a lot of, is there a better way to do it? So we can certainly follow up with more information. I think we're probably going to do a webinar in the future on this. It would be a good one to do on the fire protection.
And Jimmy, I think it's such a local jurisdiction thing. that it's a broad stroke answer. It's not.
Yeah, there is no one answer for across the country, correct?
Yeah.
One of the other questions here, I'll jump in real quick, was trends in the industry, construction industry. Somebody asked. I think there's a large push towards sustainable products and measuring products from their whole supply chain. So it's not just a battery saves you, stops your fossil fuels at your site, but what did it take to create that battery? So that's a lot of things we got to think about. It's where your products are coming from, and then being having a broader view of it, partnering with people that have the same vision as you. When you're a contractor, partnering with other contractors that have the same vision on sustainability, and just being open to it, I think, is the big things we see, and tracking your products and limiting waste. That's the things I see in the construction industry today that's really driving towards sustainability.
And Jimmy, part of it in the infrastructure bill reading is a lot of it has to do with recycling too, materials.
Yes, there's a ton.
That's a huge ton of money
Yeah,
going
but
in that.
yeah, anybody that's anti-battery, or if you see anybody that's against batteries, that's one of their top issues is, what do we do with these batteries? Because we're going to have a lot of them. What do we do with them as they're out of life? So there's lots of money in there invested towards what to do with the waste of these batteries. You'll read that throughout the infrastructure bill too. We didn't touch on that today, but there's a lot in there for that.
And ironically, a lot of the recycling within the bill, a lot of recycling is going to be done as a state in formerly coal mining cities or towns. And that's where they're going to target the recycling to create jobs in the former technology. They're trying to create more jobs in the, so that's.
I used to work as a student engineer in a coal mining company. And I'd hate to see lithium batteries dump down into a coal mine where there's methane gas and coal that is going to burn for the rest of our lives.
Yeah, I'm not an expert on this, but I'm just saying what the bill says.
Oh, no, I understand.
And Norm, it's funny. That was my career when I started out of high school. I actually worked underground for 5 years before I went to college. So that was what my family did in southwestern part of Virginia. So yeah, I feel the same way. A lot of my family are still coal miners, and we hear some of this stuff. It's, they're anti a lot of this. It's a lot of education has to happen in areas like that because it's just new to them. And yeah, I agree. Putting stuff in a coal mine, not sure about that one. But and the other thing that's in the bill that I found was kind of a good thought was a lot of the surface mining we've done, reclaiming those areas for solar farms. That's actually a good thought.
Right.
I did like that. That's a pretty good investment of money, I believe.
Yeah, I agree.
And the last question on this that we got was how do we get involved? And I think the way to get involved is just, there's going to be a lot of money thrown at it. And really it's just be proactive with your clients when they ask about things, being well educated on what what this stuff is, and just being a proponent of it. I mean, I'm a huge proponent of this. Again, like I said, my family growing up in a coal mining community, it was, we're always going to need coal. No, that's not true. I think we are going to be able to get rid of that. And there's ways to help those communities. And I think that's probably what the infrastructure bill is going to try to do. Let's see if it plays out that way. That's the hope. But everybody on this call's got money invested in this infrastructure bill. That $1.2 trillion is coming out of our pocket. So we want to make sure that we're involved with where it's being spent.
We all want to get a piece of that too.
Yes.
And Jimmy, maybe a further discussions of anybody who submits comments, but maybe in a discussion on the incentives, because there's a lot of incentives in there. That's a whole different webinar, perhaps.
Yeah. There.
Great. Any other questions? So just want to thank everybody. Great job, Jimmy. Thank you for the questions. We love it when people ask questions and they interact. It makes it much more enjoyable for all, I think. And hope we hit all the topics. And Jimmy, anything else? You good?
No, thanks for listening. And I know sometimes it's this stuff can be kind of dry. So hopefully you got something that will trigger a thought or help you in what you need to do. And if there's anything you need, please feel free to reach out to me with any questions, or if you just want to bounce things off of me, I'm always open for that.
Great.
Thanks, Dave. Thanks, Jimmy.
Thanks,
Thanks,
everybody.
everybody.
Thank you, Jimmy. Thank you, David.
Thanks.